They found 11 men on a Saturday outside a stone ranch house in New Mexico Territory. 9 were dead. 2 wished they were. Not one of them was Elena Varga. She was sitting in her chair when they found her, a 50-year-old widow with bad knees and arthritic hands, her father's rifle across her lap, coffee gone cold beside her on the boards. 20 professional gunmen had ridden in that Friday, backed by railroad money, backed by lawyers, backed by a court order signed by a judge they had already bought. She had 4 people on her side. Nobody gave her a chance. Nobody asked her what she had already decided. That was their first mistake. To understand what happened on that Friday, you have to go back. Not just to the beginning of that summer, further than that. You have to go back to 1862, when a man named Jose Varga walked into the high desert of New Mexico Territory with a mule, a pickaxe, and not much else. He had been looking for 3 years. Not for the prettiest piece of ground, not the easiest, the right one. He found it on a Tuesday in late October, when the air had finally broken from summer heat, and the light came down at a long golden angle across the scrubland. He was following a dry creek bed north when he heard something he had not expected to hear: water, not runoff, not a mud hole that would dry up by April, a real spring, cold and steady, coming up clean from deep inside the rock, running across the stones, like it had been doing since before any person alive had laid eyes on it. Jose Varga stood at the edge of that spring for a long time. He did not shout. He did not fall to his knees. He just stood there and listened. Then he took off his hat, sat down on a flat rock, and drank from his cupped hands. He said later, to his wife, to his daughter, to anyone who would sit still long enough, that he knew in that moment, not that the land would make him rich, not that life would be easy, something simpler and harder than that. He knew it was worth dying for. He built the house himself, stone by stone, wall by wall, over the course of 2 winters. The adobe was thick enough to keep the rooms cool in summer, heat that could kill a mule. The windows were small and deep-set, facing east to catch the first light. The covered overhang ran the full length of the front, so a person could sit outside even in the worst of July and still breathe. He carved 1 word above the doorframe, not in paint, carved into the stone itself, with a small iron chisel, in letters 3 inches high, Varga. In 1864, he married a woman named Rosa in 1865. They lost 2 children to scarlet fever before Elena was born in 1870. Elena came into the world in that stone house, in the narrow bed in the back room, during a thunderstorm that rolled in off the mountains and shook the walls for 6 hours. Jose said the thunder was the land welcoming her. Rosa said that was the most foolish thing she had ever heard. They were both right in their own way. Elena grew up knowing the land, the way other children know their own hands. She could read the sky for weather before she could read words on a page. She knew which water holes ran dry in August and which held through October. She knew the fence lines by feel, could ride them in the dark if she had to, and sometimes did. Her father taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. He handed her the Winchester, his rifle, the one he had carried since before she was born, and he stood behind her and corrected her grip without a word, just moved her hands where they needed to be. Then he said, "Don't pull the trigger. Let your breath do it. Breathe out slow. Let the shot. Follow the breath." She missed the first 3 times. She did not miss the 4th. Jose watched her work the laver and fire again, watched her adjust without being told. He nodded once, not praise exactly, just acknowledgement of a thing done right. The same nod he gave a fence post set correctly or a water trough filled on time. She would remember that nod for the rest of her life. The old lever action had 43 notches cut into the stock when Jose handed it to her that day. She was 12, and she did not ask about them. She already knew. She had grown up in that house. She had heard the stories, or the edges of them, the parts that filtered through walls and around corners when adults thought children were asleep. 43 times since 1862, someone had come to the Varga ranch and tried to take what was not theirs. 43 times they had not succeeded. Elena did not ask her father how many of those 43 times had ended in graves. The desert did not encourage naivety. It encouraged clear thinking, practical knowledge, and a very honest accounting of what things cost. She understood what the notches meant. She just did not yet understand why the number kept going up. The year she turned 19, the Apache raiders came. A spring morning, early with the light just beginning to color the sky. Jose was outside already, walking the north fence line. Elena was in the kitchen. Rosa was still asleep. She heard the first shot and knew immediately what it was. Not because she had heard gunfire before. She had, but because of the quality of it. The direction. The silence that followed, which was a different kind of silence than the one before. She took the rifle down from above the door, checked the load, went to the window. By the time she reached the front steps, it was already over. Her father was on the ground 40 yards out. She ran anyway. Her mother came out behind her, calling her name. Elena did not stop. Jose Varga was lying on his back in the pale spring grass, an Apache arrow in his chest, just below the left shoulder. His rifle was still in his right hand. He was still conscious. His eyes found her when she knelt beside him. He did not look at the wound. He looked at her. His lips moved. She leaned down close. "Don't sell the water," he said, 3 words. His eyes stayed on her face, long enough for her to nod, long enough for him to see the nod, and then he closed them. Jose Varga died on a Tuesday in April 1871, in the springs of the north pasture within earshot of the creek he had found 9 years before and called worth dying, for he was right about that. He had always been right about that. Rosa lasted 3 more years before fever took her. Elena buried her behind the windmill next to Jose, and then she was alone. 19 years old, 12,200 acres, 1 stone house, 200 head of cattle, and a creek that never ran dry. She did not sell. People expected her to. 3 different ranchers made offers in the first 2 years, each one fair by any measure. She turned them all down. One of them, a decent man named Carver, who ran cattle near the mountains, asked her why she was staying. Because leaving would mean it was all for nothing, she said. And it wasn't for nothing. Carver nodded slowly. He did not ask again. By the summer of 1889, Elena Varga had been running the ranch alone for 20 years. Alone is not quite the right word. She had help, in the practical sense, but the decisions were hers. The weight of it was hers, the responsibility that settles on a person's shoulders when there is no one else to pass it to. Hers, alone, and had been since she was 19. Her foreman was a man named Marcus Webb. He had been with her for 18 years, 63 years old, lean as dried leather, with hands that could set a broken leg or splice barbed wire with equal steady. He did not talk much. He did not need to. 18 years in close quarters will teach 2 people how to communicate without words. Elena had asked him once, years back, why he stayed. The pay was not remarkable. The work was hard. The isolation was absolute. Marcus thought about it longer than the question seemed to require. "I owe this land something," he said finally. She did not ask what he meant. She had the sense, even then, that the answer was something he was still working out for himself. She let it rest. That was the kind of understanding they had. There were 2 younger hands as well. Miguel Santos, 22, small and quick, with the instincts of someone who had grown up poor and learned early that paying attention was the cheapest form of insurance. And Tom Briggs, 19, the youngest of the 4, still in the process of figuring out what kind of man he was going to be. Both had learned quickly that Elena Varga did not suffer fools. They had also learned something that took longer to understand. She was fair, not kind, in the soft sense. Fair. If you did the work, she saw it. If you made a mistake, she told you plainly and expected you not to make it again. If you were sick, she did not shame you for it. Men twice her age had worked for worse. That summer began like any other in the high desert. Hot by 8 and brutal by noon, the sky a hard ceramic blue, the scrubland going pale and silver in the heat, the red rock of the distant hills shimmering at the edges. Elena was in the saddle before sunrise most days, riding fence lines, checking water holes, moving cattle between pastures before the heat made it impossible. Her left knee had been bad for 2 years. Some days it took longer to get into the saddle. She did not mention this to anyone. On Sunday mornings, she and Marcus sat under the roofline with cups strong enough to strip the finish off a table. They talked about cattle prices, fence repairs, whether the season would break early. Sometimes they sat without talking. The comfortable kind, the kind two people only find after many years. It was on one of those Sundays, late June, still and bright, that Marcus came back from his morning walk and stopped at the corner of the house before coming up the steps. Elena watched him over the rim of her cup. She could read Marcus Webb the way she read the sky. Something was sitting on him. "What is it?" she said. He crouched at the edge of the overhang, his eyes fixed on the north fence line. "Tracks," he said. Up near the spring, she set down her cup. "Our horses?" "No. When?" "Last night. Maybe before first light." She stood and stepped to the edge of the boards. Looked north toward the tree line along the creek. Nothing to see. Just the land, pale and still in the early heat. "How many horses?" "6. Maybe 8. They didn't come in. No. Stayed outside the fence. Came up to the north gate, studied the spring, and left again. They were counting something," Elena said. "Yes," Marcus said. "I think so too." She went inside, took the rifle down from above the door, checked the load without thinking, the same way she had checked it for 30 years, and hung it back up. "We'll see who comes," she said. Marcus went to find Miguel and Tom. They did not have to wait long. 3 days later, on a Tuesday in late July, the dust rose on the eastern horizon just after 9. Elena was at the front of the house. She had been there since early, with a clear view of the road. She counted 8 riders as they came up, one out front, on a black gelding too fine for ranch work, wearing a suit too clean for honest travel. The other 7 fanned out behind in a loose formation, not hurried, not tense. The formation of men who did not expect resistance. Marcus appeared at the corner of the stable, one hand resting on the rifle, leaning against the door frame. Miguel and Tom stopped what they were doing and watched. The man on the black gelding rode up to within 20 feet of the house and stopped. He did not dismount. He studied Elena the way a man studies livestock. "He is considering purchasing Mrs. Varga," he said, smooth, Eastern, educated somewhere with marble floors and a complete absence of hard weather. "That's right," Elena said. She did not stand. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I represent the Western Irrigation and Development Company out of Denver. We have significant interests in this territory. Water rights primarily. I know what irrigation companies do," Elena said. Mercer produced a practiced smile that had never quite learned to look natural. "Then you'll understand. We've been watching this valley for some time. The source on your north section, in particular, my spring," Elena said. "Currently, yes. We're prepared to make a generous offer. $12,000 for the property and associated water rights, considerably above market value." Elena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked at the 7 men behind him, flat eyes, hands near their belts. Men who had done this kind of work before and felt nothing particular about it either way. She rose from her chair. slow because of the knee, but she rose, all 5 feet and 4 inches of her, weathered and hard as the country she had spent her life in. No one had seen her bring the rifle out, but it was there, resting across her left arm, barrel down, easy as a walking stick. "I have a deed signed by the territorial governor in 1862, she said. "My father built this house. My mother is buried behind that windmill. My husband is in the ground 30 yards to your left." "She lad, that's settled. I've had this conversation 3 times before. Ask your lawyers to look up the name, Dawson, and Pruitt, and a man who called himself Colonel Reese." Though I had my doubts about the colonel part, Mercer said nothing. "Ask them what happened to those men," Elena said. "Then come back and tell me my property isn't worth defending." The man to Mercer's left shifted in his saddle. His hand drifted toward his belt. Marcus stepped away from the stable wall. He did not raise the rifle. He simply held it in a position that communicated, without ambiguity, that he was prepared to use it. The hand went still. Mercer fixed on Marcus. Then back on Elena. The practiced ease was gone entirely. "We'll be back." "With proper documentation. Legal authority. This matter will be resolved through legitimate channels. It'll be resolved the same way it's always been resolved," Elena said. "Come on my land without an invitation, and you'll find out what that looks like." Mercer held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned his horse and rode back down the road. The 7 men followed without hurrying. Nobody looked back. The dust from their horses rose and hung in the still air long after they had disappeared around the bend. Elena watched until it settled. Marcus came up and stood at the edge of the overhang. "That's a company man," he said. "Not a local," no, Elena agreed. "Western Irrigation." He said the name slowly, the way a man tastes something he has tasted before and did not want to taste again. "I know that name, Elena. I knew it before they ever set foot on this road." She turned to look at him. His jaw was set in a way she had not seen before. Not anger. Something older and heavier than anger. His eyes stayed on the empty road. "What do you mean?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Not yet," he said. "Let me think on how to say it right." She studied the set of his shoulders, the stillness in his hands, and understood that whatever he was carrying had been in him for a long time, long enough to have found its shape and settled there. She would wait. She had learned in 18 years that Marcus Webb did not withhold things out of dishonesty. He held them back until he was sure he could say them true. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a door had opened onto a room she had never looked into before. She had the feeling, quiet and certain, the way the desert tells you a storm is coming before you can see a single cloud, that what was behind that door was going to change the way she understood her own story. She went inside and put a pot of water on to heat. The afternoon settled over the ranch like a held breath. Whatever was coming, it was already on its way. That evening, after supper, after Miguel and Tom had gone to the bunkhouse and the dishes had been set to dry, Elena and Marcus sat in the kitchen. The lamp was low. Outside, the desert had gone from burnt orange to deep purple to black, and the stars were coming out one by one in a sky so clear and wide, it made everything beneath it feel very small by comparison. Elena set 2 cups on the table and sat down across from him. She did not ask the question again. She just waited. Marcus wrapped both hands around his cup and kept his eyes on the surface of it, not seeing the cup. Seeing something that had happened a long time ago in a place far from where he was sitting. The lamp hissed softly in its chimney. A horse shifted in the stable outside, its hooves scraping once on the packed earth. Then he began to talk. In 1870, Marcus Webb was 34 years old, and he was not a rancher. He was a surveyor. He worked for a land development company out of Denver called the Continental Basin Authority. A name that sounded more official than it was, which was the point. The company had 3 investors, a small office on a street that smelled of coal smoke and horse manure, and one simple business model. They found water, not water for themselves, water for whoever was willing to pay for the information. Railroad companies expanding westward needed to know where reliable sources were before they laid track. Mining operations needed water for ore processing. Cattle barons, pushing into new territory, needed to know where their herds could drink year-round. The Continental Basin Authority provided that knowledge. They sent men like Marcus into the territories to survey, map, and report, find the springs, find the aquifers, find the creeks that ran even in drought. Years, write it down, send it back to Denver. Let the investors decide what to do with the information. That was the job. Marcus did the job. In the fall of 1870, his route took him through the high desert country of New Mexico Territory. He spent 6 weeks riding that country, mapping water sources, writing reports. He was thorough, he was accurate, he was good at his work. And in October of that year, following the same dry creek bed that Jose Varga had followed 8 years before, he found the spring on the north section of what was already, though Marcus did not know it then, the Varga Ranch. He spent 2 days at that spring. He measured the flow rate. He tested the depth. He noted the clarity in the temperature and the consistency of the output across morning, afternoon, and evening. Then he wrote his report. Source classification, grade 1. Year-round output, confirmed. Volume sufficient for industrial application. Legal status, property claim filed 1862, territorial registry, individual owner. Claim validity, potentially contestable under 1861 Public Resource Statute. Recommend legal review. He sent the report to Denver. 6 weeks later, Continental Basin Authority was absorbed into a larger company. The reports went with it. The new company was called Western Land and Water Holdings. A few years after that, it changed its name again. By 1889, it was called the Western Irrigation and Development Company. Marcus stopped talking. The kitchen held the words like water holds the stone, surrounding them, settling around them, not giving them back. Elena had not moved. Her cup sat untouched in front of her. The report you sent, she said finally, the one that flagged the claim as contestable. Yes, that's the foundation they're building on. That's what gave them the opening. I believe so. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus rubbed his thumb slowly along the side of his cup. My father died in April of 1871, she said. 5 months after you sent that report. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water. Marcus did not lower his eyes. He owed her that much, at least. I know, he said, the Apache raid. That's what it was called. Something in the careful, deliberate neutrality of those 5 words made Elena go very still. Marcus, I don't have proof, he said quietly. I want to be clear about that. I have no proof of anything. What I have is questions. Things that didn't add up. The angle of the wounds, the timing, the fact that the raiding party hit one property and one property only and was never identified or tracked down afterward. He set the cup down without drinking, turned it once on the table. I have the knowledge that I sent a report to Denver saying that spring was valuable and the claim was vulnerable. And I have the knowledge that 5 months later, the man who owned that spring was dead. The lamp flame held steady. I'm just saying the fault was mine, Marcus said. I'm saying I can't prove it wasn't. Elena's fingers settled flat on the table. You came here a month after he died, she said. 19-year-old girl, alone on 12,000 acres. You showed up asking for work, yes. You've been here 18 years. Yes, never asked for a raise, no. She drew a slow breath. My father told me to let you stay, she said. Marcus went rigid. Just before he died, he said. "The man at the barn. Let him stay. He owes us something. But he's trying to stand in the right place. Don't take that from him." The words fell between them and did not echo. Marcus's throat moved. His jaw tightened. He lowered his eyes to the table and kept them there. "He knew," he said. "He suspected. He was a careful man. He noticed things." Elena pulled her cup closer, but did not drink from it. "He didn't hold it against you." That was the kind of man he was. Marcus sat with that for a long time. The lamp burned down another quarter-inch before he spoke again. "He was a better man than I deserved to know," he said. "He was," Elena said simply. "Not a comfort, not a judgment. Just the truth, stated plainly, the way she stated all truths." The wind pressed lightly against the door. Somewhere out in the desert, something moved through the brush and went quiet again. "Marcus," Elena said after a while. "Yes." "I need to know you're here for the right reasons. Not guilt, not debt." She held his gaze across the table. "A man driven by guilt will hold together fine right up. Until the moment, everything depends on him. Then he'll crack, not from cowardice, but from carrying the wrong thing." Marcus thought about it carefully, the way a man thinks about a question he has been asking himself for 18 years. "I came here driven by guilt," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise, but somewhere along the way, this stopped being penance. This became the place I belong, not because I owe it. Because it's mine, not on paper, but in the way that matters." Elena studied his face for a moment. "Then we're all right," she said. She stood and took both cups to the basin. The conversation was finished, not because everything was resolved, but because everything that needed saying had been said. Some things don't resolve. They find their proper weight and settle. Marcus put on his hat and went out to check the stable before turning in. He stood outside in the enormous night. The stars burned overhead without comment. He thought about Jose Varga, finding a half-frozen stranger in the snow and asking no questions. He thought about a man who could forgive something before it was even confessed. Then he went inside. 2 days after Mercer's visit, a telegram arrived from Santa Fe. Miggle brought it from town, riding fast, his face carrying the careful expression of someone delivering news they would rather not deliver. Elena read it, standing in the yard. Marcus stood beside her and read it over her shoulder. The language was formal and bureaucratic, the kind engineered to make something ugly sound procedural. The Western Irrigation and Development Company had filed a petition with the territorial court disputing the validity of the Varga land claim. The dispute centered not on the deed itself. The deed, the telegram acknowledged, appeared to be in order, but on the water rights associated with the property. Specifically, the petition cited a territorial statute from 1861 designating certain natural water sources in New Mexico territory as public resources, not subject to private ownership. A territorial judge would hear the case in 60 days. Elena was advised to retain legal counsel. She was also advised, in language that managed to be both polite and threatening, to avoid confrontations or acts of violence that might prejudice her position during the resolution period. She folded the telegram once, twice, and put it in her shirt pocket. 60 days, Marcus said. They don't need 60 days to win in court, Elena said. They need 60 days to appear as though they tried first. Makes it cleaner afterward. Whatever afterward looks like. She walked to the stable and sat down on an overturned bucket. Marcus stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame. There's something else, Elena said. From her left shirt pocket, she drew a folded document. Not the telegram, something older. The paper softened at the creases from being opened and closed many times. She handed it to Marcus. He opened it carefully and read. It was a copy of the 1861 statute the company had cited. But alongside it, in Elena's careful handwriting, ran a series of annotations. Dates, names, an archive reference number, and at the bottom, underlined twice, statute signed, Acting Registrar T. Calhoun, March 4, 1861. Calhoun deceased, February 17, 1863. Marcus read it twice. The signature belongs to a man who had been in the ground for 2 years when they filed their claim, Elena said. The statute itself is real. It's in the Territorial Archive, but the annotation designating this specific spring as public property was added later by someone who copied Calhoun's name onto a document he never touched. Marcus lowered the paper slowly. They weren't trying to steal the ranch first, he said. They were trying to steal the law that protected it. That's exactly right, Elena said. If they win on the water claim, they don't need to remove me at all. They cut my right to use the spring on my own land. The ranch becomes worthless without the water, and I leave on my own. Then take the evidence to the court. Their court, Elena said. Their judge. Their attorneys drafted the filing. She took the document back and folded it along its worn lines. Anything I bring into that room will be buried before anyone reads it aloud. Marcus straightened against the doorframe. Then, why keep it? Because I've already sent a copy to Santa Fe, filed it with the archive 3 weeks ago. Before Mercer ever set foot on this road, she slid the document back into her pocket. I don't expect the court to act on it. Not now. Maybe not ever. But when all this is finished, one way or another, there will be a record somewhere of what actually happened. Truth has a way of outlasting the people who buried it. The stable smelled of hay and leather and the particular dry warmth of animals in summer. A swallow moved somewhere high in the rafters. How long have you known they were coming? Marcus said. 3 years, Elena said. Since the first time I heard the company's name mentioned in town. I didn't know what they were after, but I knew they were after something. She stood and dusted off her hands. Careful people leave tracks, she said. You just have to be willing to follow them long enough. 4 days after the telegram, a horse stopped at the front gate. Elena was in the kitchen. Marcus called her name from some outside. When she came to the door, she saw Billy Oakes on his roan horse at the gate, holding his hat in both hands. Billy ran the general store in town. He was 30 years old and not a bad man. He existed, as many people did in those years, in the gap between what he knew was right and what he could afford to do about it. He did not dismount. He turned his hat brim through his fingers and held Elena's gaze for about a second before his eyes dropped. Mrs. Varga. Mr. Mercer asked me to bring you a message. I'm listening, Elena said. He says the company has reconsidered. They're prepared to go to $15,000. He says that is final. Billy swallowed. He says you have until Friday to accept. The yard held the heat and said nothing. And if I don't, Elena said, Billy's hands tightened on his hat brim. He says they'll come Friday, regardless. 20 men. Professional men. He stopped, started again. He wanted me to tell you that nobody has to get hurt, that it doesn't have to go that way. Elena came down the front steps and stood in the yard, close enough to speak without raising her voice. Billy? Ma'am? How much is the loan? He blinked. Ma'am, your bank loan. The one coming due. His face moved through 3 expressions in quick succession. How did you? Because Mercer knows, she said evenly. That's how they operate. They find the thing a person can't afford to lose, and they put their hand on it quietly. It's not about you, Billy. You're the messenger because you had something they could reach. Billy's shoulders dropped by a fraction. Something in his face shifted, not quite shame, but the shape shame leaves behind. I'm sorry, Mrs. Varga. Don't be sorry. You delivered the message. That part's done. She kept her voice without edge. Tell Mr. Mercer I said no. Same answer as always, ma'am. 20 men. I heard you, she said. Go on home, Billy. He held her 1 moment longer, the way a person holds the gaze of someone, standing at the edge of something steep and unforgiving, someone who has chosen to stand there, not from recklessness, but from a decision already made and settled. Then he put his hat on and rode away without looking back. Elena watched the road until it curved and swallowed him. Then she turned to Marcus. 3 days. She said, "Yes, we'd better get to work." The preparations used every hour of those 3 days. Marcus moved through the ranch with the deliberate focus of a man who had done this kind of work before, in a different war, on different ground. He did not talk about that war. But the soldier inside the rancher was visible now, in the way he measured distances by eye, in the way he positioned the water troughs for cover without needing to think about it, in the way he walked the perimeter at dusk with his lips moving slightly as he ran calculations that had nothing to do with cattle. He reinforced the stable doors with extra timber. He mapped the approaches from every direction and worked out where attackers coming from the east, north, and south would each have to cross open ground. He noted how long they would be exposed. At each point, "They won't come from one direction," he told Elena on the first evening, crouched over a rough sketch of the property. "They'll split. Probably 3 groups. One draws attention from the front, 2 flank wide. How do you know? It's what I would do," he said. Miggle rode to town and came back with ammunition and supplies, asking no questions. Tom rode out to the neighboring ranches with a plain message delivered plainly, the way Elena had told him to. He came back the second evening and sat at the kitchen table with his hat on his knee, his eyes on the floor. Most said no, he told her. 1 man wouldn't open the door. 2 said they had families. 1 said he'd pray for you. There's nothing to say to that, Elena said. 2 said maybe, not yes. Just maybe, she nodded. Maybe was more than nothing, and Reyes? Marcus said from the doorway. Tom's jaw tightened slightly. He was in the window when I rode up. I saw him through the glass, but he didn't come out. His wife said he wasn't home. Nobody spoke for a moment. Hector Reyes had sold his spread to Western Irrigation 6 months before, taken their money, moved his family into town. The whole valley knew the story. Most people kept it to themselves out of something that looked like courtesy, but was closer to relief that it hadn't been them. Elena did not say anything about Reyes. Now, get some rest, she told Tom. All of you. 1 more day to finish what we've started. On the 3rd day, Tom came back from town with a name. The man leading the hired guns was Samuel Cross, former United States Marshal. Before that, a boundary agent working New Mexico Territory throughout the 1860s. He had surveyed this country. He knew its water sources, its fence lines, its distances. Tom set it out plainly at supper. When he finished, he glanced at Marcus. Marcus had gone completely still. The lamp on the table threw his shadow long against the wall behind him. "You know that name," Elena said. "Yes." He folded his hands on the table. "Cross worked this territory in the late 60s. Different outfit than mine, but our paths crossed. He was a careful man, fair-minded for the kind of work he was doing, and—" Marcus's jaw moved. Winter of 1869. He was surveying boundary lines north of here, near the mountains. A storm came in fast. One of those hard ones that dropped 2 feet in 6 hours with no warning. He got caught out, lost his horse. By the time anyone had a chance to find him, he was close to the end. Elena waited. "Your father found him," Marcus said. Tom looked up sharply. Miguel set down his fork. "Jose Varga," Elena said. "Found him in the snow, half frozen, out of his mind with cold. Brought him back here. Kept him in the stable for 3 weeks while he recovered. Fed him, warmed him, got him back on his feet." Marcus kept his voice even. "Cross rode out when he could sit a horse again. Your father never asked for a thing in return." The kitchen was quiet enough that the lamp could be heard. "So, the man leading the hired guns against this ranch," Elena said slowly, "ate at this table," Marcus said. "Owes Jose Varga his life?" Does he know whose ranch this is? He knows the name Varga, Marcus said. I'd stake everything I own on that. And he's coming anyway. Marcus did not answer. He did not need to. The fact of Friday's dawn was the answer. Elena rose from the table. She carried her plate to the basin and stood at the window. The darkness outside, pressing flat against the glass. Get some sleep, she said without turning around. All of you. She reached up and took the rifle down from above the door, checked the load, hung it back up. Tomorrow night will be harder, she said, and Friday will be hardest. But we know what we're defending, and now we know who we're defending it against. She turned and held each of them in her gaze for a moment. Marcus, Miguel, Tom, sitting in the lamp light with their own weights and their own reasons. That's enough for tonight, she said. That's enough. Thursday came in hot and stayed that way, the kind of heat that turns the air above the ground into something you can almost see. A shimmer, a distortion, the desert lying about what it is. Everything slows in that heat, except thought. Thought moves faster, or seems to, turning over the same ground again and again, and finding nothing new but continuing anyway. Elena worked through the day, not because much remained to be done. Marcus had been thorough, and 3 days of careful preparation had covered nearly everything. She worked because stopping felt dishonest. The land needed tending, regardless of what Friday held. The cattle needed water. The fence along the east section had a loose post. She had been meaning to reset for 2 weeks. She reset it. She rode the perimeter of the property once, slowly, in the long light of mid-morning. She took in every acre of it, the way you take, in a face. You are not certain. You will see again. Steadily, without hurry, committing it to a place deeper than memory. She did not say goodbye to it. That would have meant surrendering something she had not yet surrendered. But she looked in the afternoon. Marcus found Tom behind the stable. Tom was sitting on an upturned bucket with a rifle across his knees, running an oil rag along the barrel. He had cleaned it twice already. His hands needed something to do, and the rifle was what they had found. Marcus dragged a hay bale close and sat across from him. A barn swallow cut through the gap above the south door and disappeared into the rafters. The horses moved in their stalls. Neither man spoke for a while, the particular shared weight of people carrying the same thing and knowing it. You ever been in a fight? Marcus said finally. Not a tactical question. A real one. Not like this, Tom said. No, not like this. Marcus turned his hands over once and studied his palms. The first time is the hardest, not because of the danger. You find out things about yourself you didn't know before. Some of them are good things. Some of them aren't what you hoped. Tom's grip tightened slightly on the rifle. What if He stopped. What if you run? Tom kept his eyes on the weapon in his hands. Then you run, Marcus said, and afterward you live with it. If you're lucky, another chance comes and you try again. He reached for his hat on the hay bale beside him. But I don't think you'll run. How do you know? Because running would have been easier. 2 days ago, you had time and reason, and nobody would have blamed you. Marcus stood. That's not a small thing, son. That's most of it right there. He went back toward the house. Tom sat with the rifle in his hands and watched the shadow of the door frame creep slowly across the dirt floor, and he thought about what Marcus had said until the light changed, and it was time to start the evening work. Miguel spent most of that afternoon at the north fence near the spring. There was no work left there. The fence was mended. The cattle moved to the south pasture. He had no reason to be there, except that his feet had carried him in that direction, and he had let them. He sat on the top rail with his boots hooked on the middle one and let the sound of the water fill the space where thinking would have been. The creek moved over its stones, the way it always moved, steady, unhurried, indifferent to everything happening on the bank above it. it did not know what tomorrow held. It simply kept going, the way it had kept going through every drought and freeze and hard season this land had ever seen. Miguel was 22 years old. He had worked 3 ranches, survived 1 bad winter on his own, and been in 2 fist fights that settled nothing, except who had hit harder. He knew what hardship was. In the ordinary way, a young man knows it. He did not know what tomorrow was. But sitting there above the water, something settled into him that he had not been able to name before. It had to do with why Elena Varga had spent 30 years on this particular piece of ground. It was not the land itself, or not only the land. It was the fact that the water kept moving, that some things continued, regardless of what people did to each other, that those things could not be purchased or threatened into compliance. They could only be briefly redirected before finding their way back to where they had always been going. The spring had been here before Jose Varga found it. It would be here long after everyone who had ever argued over it was gone. The arguing still mattered. The standing still mattered. He understood that now, not for the water's sake, but for the sake of the person doing the standing, for what it meant about who you were and who you chose to be when the cost became real. He climbed down from the fence when the sun got low and the air dropped a few degrees, and walked back to the bunkhouse to clean his rifle for the 3rd time. That night, the last night, Elena did not call a meeting. She did not give a speech. She made supper. The 4 of them ate at the kitchen table, and when the plates were cleared, she said, "Get as much sleep as you can. I'll be up early. Marcus, check the east approach before we turn in." That was all. After the others had gone to the bunkhouse, Elena sat alone at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low. She unlocked the wooden box on the shelf and took out the envelope she had placed there in the early hours of the previous morning. The letter, without a name on it. She opened it, read it through once, and added 2 sentences at the bottom with slightly heavier pressure, the way handwriting changes when what you are writing has finally become clear. She sealed it again, set it back in the box, locked it. Then she sat with her hands flat on the table and let the night do what it needed to do around her. 5 miles to the east, in a camp she could not see, Samuel Cross sat alone beside a fire he did not need for warmth. The night was not cold. He had not built the fire for heat. He had built it because a man needs something to look at when he cannot look at himself. He had done this work 20 times. He had never lost sleep before a job. The work was the work. You took the contract, you executed it, you moved on. That was the agreement he had made with himself a long time ago, and it had served him well enough. But the name on this contract was Varga. He knew that name. He had known it for 20 years. He had known it was a ranch in this valley, a stone house on a spring, a woman who had been running it alone since she was 19 years old. He had known all of this, and he had taken the contract anyway. He turned a stick in the fire and watched the coals shift and did not sleep. Around midnight, leather scraped on the front steps of the ranch house. Elena knew his weight. Marcus came in and helped himself to what was left in the pot, the last of the day, thick and dark and barely warm. He sat across from her. They measured each other in the lamplight for a moment. "Your shoulder," she said. He moved it slightly. "It'll hold." "That's not what I asked." "It'll hold," he said again. A door closed. She let it go. "Marcus," she said after a while. "Yes, my father said something else before he died. Something I've never told you." He set down his cup. He said, "The man at the barn is trying to stand in the right place. Don't take that from him." She paused. "I always understood that as being about guilt, about letting you work off what you owed, and now I think he meant something different." She moved her thumb along the edge of the table. "I think he meant that everyone needs a place where they're trying to be the right kind of person. even if they've been the wrong kind before. And taking that place away from someone, it doesn't just cost them a job. It costs them the chance to find out who they could be. Marcus held his cup in both hands. He was a wise man, he said quietly. He was a practical man. That's different. She kept her voice even. Wisdom sounds like it arrives from somewhere above. What he had was clear sight. He saw things as they were, not as he wished they were. You have that too? She shook her head slightly. I have stubbornness. From a distance, the two look alike. The almost smile crossed Marcus's face, the rarest thing she had seen from him in 18 years. Elena, he said. She held his gaze. Whatever tomorrow brings, this has been the right place for me. I want you to know that, not as a last thing, just as a true thing. I know, she said. I've known for a while? He nodded. That was enough. They sat without speaking as the lamp burned lower. Outside, the desert held itself in the deep hush of 3 in the morning, the hour when even the coyotes have gone quiet, and the world seems to be waiting for permission to continue. A breath of wind moved against the door, once pressed us, then released. The water in the wash basin caught the lamplight and held it steady. At some point, both of them stopped, waiting for the next thing to say, and simply sat together, enduring the dark until it changed. The window grayed, then paled, then the first thin edge of copper appeared along the eastern hills. Red, Marcus said, his voice low. Elena already knew. She had felt it before she saw it, the particular quality of the light, the way the air arrived at a different temperature, the Khan, when the sky burned that color. Get your rifle, she said. He was already reaching for it. They came at 9. The hired guns rode in from the east. 2 columns, walking their horses at a measured pace that said everything about how they understood the situation. Men who expect no resistance do not ride hard. They walk. They take their time. The walking itself is a statement. We have already decided how this ends. At the front of the left column, on a gray horse, rode a man in a black duster that had no business in that heat. He was near 50, lean and weathered, with a white scar running from his left jaw down below his collar. His eyes moved across the ranch property as he came, not nervously, but professionally, reading the terrain the way a man reads it after 10,000 times, and it has become as natural as breathing. Samuel Cross. Elena took him in from the front steps, her father's rifle easy in her hands. Marcus was at the stable. Miguel at the north window of the house. Tom behind the water trough near the south fence. Everyone where Marcus had placed them, everyone holding. The riders stopped 150 yards out. Cross rode forward alone. At 100 yards, he swung down from his horse in one practiced motion, looped the reins over a fence post, and walked the rest of the way on foot. He stopped at 50 yards. Mrs. Varga. His voice was flat and professional, calibrated to carry without effort across the still morning air. My name is Samuel Cross. I'm here on behalf of the Western Irrigation and Development Company, acting under a court order issued by the Territorial Court of New Mexico. He held up a folded document. This order grants the company right of possession pending resolution of the ownership dispute. I'm asking you to vacate the premises in an orderly fashion. Elena stepped down to the yard. I know who you are, Mr. Cross, she said. His chin came up by a degree. You know my name? He said. I know more than your name. She crossed the yard toward him, unhurried, her knee aching with each step, but her stride giving nothing away. Come closer. He measured her for a moment. Then he walked forward until 10 yards separated them and stopped. Ups, close she could read him better than she had expected. She had anticipated the professional blankness she had seen in Mercer's hired men, that flattened look of someone who had made a practice of feeling nothing about their work. Cross did not have that look. His face had been pressed into its current shape by a great deal of time and a great many decisions, but Underneath the pressing, something older and different remained. "You worked this territory in the 1860s, she said. "Yes." Boundary agent. "Before you were a marshal?" "Yes." "And in the winter of 1869, you were caught in a storm north of here, near the mountains." She kept her voice level, unhurried. "You lost your horse. You were in the snow for 2 days." Cross went absolutely still. Not the stillness of a man composing himself. The stillness of a man who has been reached in a place he had believed unreachable. "A man found you," Elena said. "Brought you to his ranch. Kept you 3 weeks. Fed you at his table. Let you sleep in his stable." The riders behind Cross were 150 yards away and could not hear any of this. It was just the two of them in the hard morning light, with the scar white along his jaw and the carved word above the door behind her. "His name was Jose Varga," Elena said. "This is his ranch. That is his door." She held Cross's gaze without effort. "And I am his daughter." Cross absorbed this with a stillness that cost him something. "I know," he said. His voice had changed, not softer, but recalibrated, like a compass needle finding north after being held away from it. "I thought you might," Elena said. "Mrs. Varga, there's something else." She reached into her shirt pocket and drew out the folded document she had carried for 3 years. She did not hand it to him. "The court order. Your holding cites a statute from 1861, signed by Acting Registrar T. Calhoun." Cross's eyes moved to the document in his own hand. "Calhoun died in February of 1863, Elena said. "The annotation designating this spring as public property was added 2 years after he was in the ground, by someone who copied his name onto a document he never touched." Cross turned the court order over once, studied the territorial seal on the back. "You're telling me the filing is forged. I'm telling you what the evidence shows." She put the document back in her pocket. "I'm not asking you to act on it. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you've been handed and whose land you've been sent against." Her voice carried no anger, no appeal, just the plain weight of fact. "My father pulled you out of the snow and asked for nothing. He never mentioned it afterward. He was that kind of man." A muscle moved in Cross's jaw. "I know what kind of man he was," he said quietly. "Then you know what this land meant to him." Cross fixed his gaze on the old carving above the doorframe. Varga, worn by 27 years of weather, but still legible to anyone who took the trouble to look. He held it there long enough that it meant something. Then he turned around and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, rode it back to the riders, conferred briefly. Then he dismounted again on the far side of his horse, and the line spread wide, the gunmen fanning out across the road and into the scrub on both sides, taking positions, using the land the way men use it when they have studied it beforehand. They settled in. Elena came back to the front steps and stood. "Marcus, here, Miguel, here, Tom, a beat. Then, here." She raised her voice, just enough to carry across the yard to where Cross stood beside his horse. "You've heard what I have to say. You know what we're defending and why." She squared her feet on the hard ground and held the rifle across her chest. "My answer is the same as it's always been." She faced the line of riders spread across her land. "Come and take it," she said. The 3 hours until noon were the longest of Elena Varga's life. Cross sent a man to the steps at 11 o'clock with final terms: surrender and walk away unharmed. Elena sent him back without a word. At 11:30, Tom called from the water trough. "They're moving." "Hold," Marcus said from the stable. "Not yet." The gunmen were repositioning, not advancing yet, reorganizing into 3 groups exactly as Marcus had predicted. The center holding, visible, the left flank pressing north toward the stable, the right swinging wide around the south. At 11:45, Cross rose from behind a rock and called one final time Mrs. Varga. "Last chance." Elena said nothing. He waited 30 seconds. Then he drew his pistol and fired once into the air. The gunmen stood and started forward. What happened next is difficult to tell cleanly. A fight is not a sequence of decisive moments. It is noise and heat and the compression of time into something unrecognizable, where 3 seconds stretch in 30, vanish without trace. What Elena remembered afterward, in the pieces that came back over the years, were not the moments of action. They were the moments between, the half second of absolute hush, after her first shot left the barrel and Cross went down, grabbing his right thigh. The way the attackers scattered, professionals, yes, but startled nonetheless. And then the world tore itself open into sound. Marcus from the stable window, crack, crack. 2 of the gunmen dropped. Then a third. Tom at the water trough, firing steady. 1 of the company men stumbled back and sat down hard in the dirt. Miguel from the north window. 1 shot, then another, 5 down. 6. The hired guns did not stop. They worked their cover intelligently, moving between shots, shielding each other's advance. The distance collapsed. 40 yards became 20, 20 became 15. The left flank reached the south corner of the stable. Elena heard Marcus shout, a sound she had never heard from him, sharp and controlled, followed by a lower sound that told her without words. Marcus, hit, strained and tight, shoulder. Still up, south corner. 2 of the attackers had gotten through the south wall, firing between the boards. Marcus went quiet. Tom was already moving, breaking from the water trough toward the stable door. Miguel lay covering fire from the north window. Tom made it through, disappeared inside. Elena worked the rifle fast. 1 of the 2 men at the south corner dropped. The other pulled back into cover. The lever clicked on an empty chamber. She dropped to 1 knee, reloaded, drew the pistol from her belt. 6 rounds. She counted what was still moving, still too many, still coming. Then the west window of the house exploded inward. She heard the glass before she processed what it meant. 2 of the attackers had gone around the back. The 1 approach Marcus had flagged as the hardest to cover from outside. They were inside the house. She moved through the front door without running. The kitchen was small. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf, the lamp still burning low. 2 men larger than her by 20 years and 50 pounds, both of them expecting to find a frightened woman. They did not find that. What happened in that kitchen, in the next 40 seconds, stayed between Elena Varga and the walls her father had built. When she came back out the front door, she had the pistol in her right hand and the reloaded rifle in her left. She walked to the top of the steps and she kept firing. Smoke drifted across the yard. The sun hammered down without mercy. She was down to 4 rounds in the pistol and 3 of the gunmen between her and the stable when the gunfire changed. New shots from the east ridge, from above, from the high ground that overlooked the property, from the northeast where no one had been positioned and no one had expected anyone to be. 10 riders came over that ridge hard, firing as they moved, and they hit the left flank of the attackers from a direction that had no cover against it. Caught between 2 lines of fire, the calculus of the situation shifted in seconds, the way it always shifts when the numbers change faster than professional discipline can absorb. The left flank broke first. Then it spread the way. A break always spreads through the training first, and then through the simpler thing beneath the training, which is the animal understanding that this particular fight is no longer worth the price of staying in it. Within 3 minutes of the riders appearing on the ridge, 6 more of the gunmen were down, and the rest were moving for their horses. Some reached them. Some did not. When the last shot faded, the hush that followed was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard. She stood in the yard with smoke still threading from both barrels and took stock. 11, down total 9, not moving, Two wounded badly enough to stay where they were. The riders from the ridge were coming down the slope now, picking their way through the scrub. 10 of them, neighbors, some of them. Men she recognized from the feed store and the dry goods, men who had said maybe 3 days ago, or had not said anything at all. At the front of the group, on a brown horse with a white blaze on its face, rode a man Elena had not expected to see, Hector Reyes, the man who had sold his spread 6 months before. The man who had not come to the door when Tom knocked. The man the entire valley called the first one to give up. He brought his horse to a stop at the base of the slope and held Elena's gaze across 30 yards of dust and spent powder. She did not call to him, did not lift a hand. She held his gaze across the distance, and he held hers, and in that long, wordless exchange, something passed between them that required no translation and would not have been improved by any. Reyes gave one short nod. Elena gave one back. Then she turned and walked toward the stable to find Marcus. Marcus was alive. That was the first thing she needed to know, and she knew it before she reached the stable door because she could hear him. Tim. A low, controlled sound, the sound of a man managing pain rather than being managed by it. Tom had gotten him to the back wall, away from the broken boards and the light coming in through the bullet holes. He was sitting up with his back against the stone foundation, the same stone her father had laid, and his right hand pressed against his left shoulder. Elena crouched beside him and moved his hand, asking. The bullet had gone through clean. Entry in the front of the shoulder, exit in the back, nothing shattered from the feel of it. Bad enough. Not the worst. Can you move your fingers? She said. He moved them. Slow, deliberate? Good. She folded her bandana into a compress and pressed it to the wound. Hold that. I know how to hold a bandage, he said. I know you do. She looked at Tom, unhurt as far as she could see. The color had gone entirely from his face, and his hands carried a fine tremor he was controlling by holding them very still against his knees. He was 19 years old, and this had been the first battle of his life, and he had not run. You did well, she told him. He met her gaze. The tremor did not stop, but something in his face settled, the way a person settles when they have been bracing against something enormous and are given permission, finally, to breathe. Is it over? He said. For today, she said. She helped Marcus to his feet, one arm under his good shoulder, and they walked him toward the house. Tom went ahead to open the door. The yard was quiet in the particular way that follows violence. Not peaceful, but emptied out, like a room. After something has been removed from it that had always been there, the dust was settling. The smoke had thinned to almost nothing in the noon heat. 2 horses, spooked during the fight, were standing near the north fence with their heads down, uncertain what to do with themselves now that the noise had stopped. Elena noted all of it without stopping. She got Marcus inside, got him onto the narrow bench by the south wall, and went to work on the wound properly. Tom boiled water. Neither of them spoke much. The work was the work, and it required attention. When the shoulder was cleaned and bound, and Marcus had been given the last of the whiskey from the cabinet above the stove, Elena went back outside. Miguel was on the front steps when she came from the corner of the house. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands turned upward in his lap, and studying them with an expression she recognized. Not injury, not fear. Something that does not show on the outside and does not have a clean name in any language. She went and sat beside him on the step. She did not speak, did not reach for his shoulder. She sat with the rifle across her knees and let the silence do what silence sometimes needs to do, not fill the space, but hold it open long enough for whatever was in there to find its own way out. After a while, Miguel said, I didn't think it would feel like this. No, she said, it doesn't. The first time, does it get easier? She gave it the honesty it deserved. You get stronger, she said. That's a different thing. Easier means it weighs less. Stronger means you can carry the same weight without going down. One of those is possible. She set the rifle against the step beside her. Don't let anybody tell you different. Miguel turned his hands over once, then let them rest palm down on his knees. While it was happening, he said, I kept thinking about the water, the spring. I kept thinking, it's still running right now. It doesn't know about any of this. Alina said nothing. Is that strange, he said. No, she said. That's not strange at all. They sat together on the steps while the afternoon light moved across the yard, and the shadows of the fence posts lengthened toward the east, and the land went on being the land, in the way it always had, without comment or ceremony, or any particular concern for what had just happened on its surface. Tom appeared from inside the house, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at the two of them sitting on the steps. He sat down on Miguel's other side without being asked. The three of them sat there together for a while, the 50-year-old woman and the two young men, and nobody said anything, and nobody needed to. Come help me with Marcus, Elena said eventually. She stood. They stood beside her. They went in. Hector Reyes and his men stayed for the burying. Nobody asked them to. Nobody needed to ask. When Elena came back out into the yard an hour after the shooting stopped, Reyes had already organized his men into two groups, one to do the digging, one to carry. He was directing. He was directing the work with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that there was nothing to be said about it, and that the fastest way through was straight through. Elena stood at the edge of the yard and watched him for a moment. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the work. They put the dead in a gully a mile east of the house, in the hard, rocky ground where the scrubland thickened, and the shade from a low ridge kept the sun off in the afternoons. Simple graves, quickly dug, marked with stones from the creek bed, no words spoken over them. Words felt insufficient or dishonest, or both. These men had come to take something that was not theirs, and had paid the price of that. The graves were not a judgment. They were just what you did with the dead, whoever they were and whatever they had done. The two wounded men who were still alive they bandaged as best they could manage and loaded onto horses. Elena folded a piece of paper, wrote 6 words on it, and tucked it into the coat pocket of the less badly hurt of the two. Tell the company, this land is not for sale. No signature. None was needed. When the work was done, Reyes's men gathered their horses. The afternoon was deep now, the heat beginning to ease by a fraction, the sky going from white to a pale-washed blue in the west. Reyes walked his horse to where Elena stood near the gate. He stopped. She looked up at him. He was a broad man, darker than most in the valley, with hands that showed 20 years of ranch work and eyes that showed something harder to name. He held his hat against his saddle horn, and he did not look away from her. But he did not speak right away either. Reyes, she said. Mrs. Varga. Thank you, she said. Something moved across his face. Not the relief of being thanked. Something more complicated than that. Don't thank me, he said. I should have been here sooner. He meant it. She could hear that he meant it completely. Not as a social grace, but as a plain statement of something he had been carrying since the moment he had stood at his window and watched Tom ride away. You came, she said. Took me too long to decide. You came, she said again. Final. Not absolution. She was not offering absolution, and he was not asking for it. Just the fact of the thing, acknowledged between them. He had come. That was what was true now. Reyes looked at the house, at the stable with its broken boards and bullet holes, at the 3 wooden markers behind the windmill, Jose, Rosa, and the man Elena had buried in 1879. Then he put his hat on. Keep the water, he said. He touched the brim and rode away down the road, his men falling in behind him, the dust rising and thinning and gone. Elena stood at the gate until the road was empty. She did not know, would never know, that Reyes had ridden to 13 different ranches that week, that he had knocked on 13 doors and stood on 13 porches and asked, not for himself, not for any return, but for a woman whose land bordered his former land and whose cause he had understood from the beginning and had been too afraid to join, until the fear of not joining became greater than the fear of joining. She did not know that 11 of those 13 doors had closed in his face. She did not know that he had ridden home each evening to the rented house in town and sat in the kitchen while his wife pretended to sleep and his children breathed in the back room, and that he had sat there in the dark understanding with full clarity that he was the kind of man who sold, and the question was whether he was also the kind of man who, having sold, could still find his way back to something worth standing for. She did not know any of that, but she understood enough about a man who said, I should have been here sooner to know that whatever it had cost him to come, it had cost more than he would ever say. That evening, as the sun went down behind the western hills, Elena sat on the front steps alone. The neighbors had gone home. Marcus was sleeping in the back room, his shoulder packed and bound, his breathing the deep, steady breathing of a man whose body has decided the argument is over for now. Miguel and Tom were in the stable, repairing the worst of the broken boards by lamplight, not because it needed to be done tonight, but because their hands still needed something to do, and neither of them was ready to lie down in the dark with their own thoughts. Elena sat with her arms on her knees and her hands folded and watched the sky go through its colors. The spring was running. She could hear it faintly from here, not the water itself, but the life that gathered near it in the evenings. The insects, the night birds, the low rustling of small animals coming down to drink, the sound of living things near a source. She thought about the letter in the box on the kitchen shelf, the one she had written in the early hours of Thursday morning before any of it had happened, not knowing whether she would be alive to see. This evening she had written it as a thing that needed to exist regardless of what came after. She went inside and unlocked the box. She took out the letter and read it again in the lamplight. It said what she had meant it to say. Not beautifully. She was not a woman of beautiful language, but plainly and completely and in the right order. It told the story of the spring, where it came from, as best as anyone had ever been able to determine. How it had run through every drought in 40 years without failing. What it needed to keep running, which was nothing, only to be left alone. She read it through to the 2 sentences she had added at the bottom, the ones written in slightly heavier pencil, as if the hand had changed its pressure without meaning to. The water remembers what this land has been through, even when the people who lived here are gone. That is why you must never sell it. Not because of me, because of what it means that it is still here. She folded the letter back along its worn creases, placed it in the envelope, set it back in the box beneath the deed and the offer letter and the copy of the forged statute. She locked the box and put it back on the shelf. Then she went back outside and sat on the steps and watched the last of the light leave the sky. She thought about Samuel Cross somewhere on the eastern road, riding away from this ranch for the second time in his life. The first time he had ridden away, whole, recovered, in someone else's debt. This time he was riding away with a bullet hole through his thigh and a different kind of debt, the kind that doesn't heal clean and doesn't show in the light and doesn't go away when you put enough miles between yourself and where it was incurred. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not feel satisfaction either. She felt the particular quietness that comes after something has been completed, not finished in the way that means it won't come back, but completed in the way that means your part in it is done. For now, and you have done it the way it needed to be done." The stars came out above the Varga ranch, one by one, the way they always did. She sat until the coyotes started up in the south, and then she went inside and went to bed and slept, without dreaming for the first time in a week. 3 weeks later, a telegram arrived from Denver. Marcus brought it from town. He was moving better. The shoulder was healing cleanly, though he carried it slightly high, and probably always would. He set the telegram on the kitchen table and stepped back and let Elena read it. She read it once, set it down, read it down, read it again. The language was businesslike and brief, the kind of language designed to make a retreat sound like a strategic decision. The Western Irrigation and Development Company had reviewed its operational priorities in New Mexico territory. Following a reassessment of resource allocation and in light of the identification of alternative water sources in the northern sector, the company was withdrawing its petition with the territorial court and relinquishing its interest in properties in the Varga Valley area. The matter was considered closed. Elena set the telegram on the table. Marcus studied her face. "They're lying," he said, "about the alternative source. There isn't one. Not one that compares to this. I know," Elena said. "They're moving on to easier targets, probably, which means they'll do this to someone else." "Yes," she said, "they will." She held the telegram for a moment longer. "But not today, and not here." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "You won," he said. Elena held the telegram a moment longer. Then she set it on the table and went to the window and stood there looking out at the north pasture, at the tree line where the spring ran cold from the rock the same way it had run since before any of them were born. "My father won in 1862 when he drove the first stake into this ground," she said. "My mother won when she stayed after he died. My husband won. Every day he worked himself closer to the end, trying to make this place." "Hold." She kept her eyes on the pasture. "I just kept holding what they gave me." "That's not nothing," Marcus said. "Holding is not nothing?" "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She picked up the telegram and folded it in half. She went to the shelf and unlocked the wooden box and placed the telegram inside. Next to the offer letter, next to the forged statute evidence, next to the sealed envelope with no name on it, she locked the box again and put it back in its place. "Coffee?" she said. "Please," Marcus said. She put the pot on, and the two of them sat at the table in the afternoon light and drank their coffee without saying much, the way they had been sitting at tables together for 18 years. Comfortable in the silence, neither of them needing it to be anything other than what it was. Outside, the spring ran on. Elena Varga ran the Varga Ranch for 13 more years after that summer. They were not easy years. The land did not offer easy years to anyone, and Elena had never asked for ease. She asked for the work to mean something, and it did, and that was what she had. The arthritis in her hands worsened steadily. The left knee worsened. By 1895, she was using a cane on bad days, which she carried as a practical tool rather than any kind of admission. The work slowed, but it did not stop. She learned, as she had learned everything else, to adapt, to find the efficient way, the way that spent energy where it counted and saved it where it didn't. Marcus stayed for 5 of those years before his body made the decision his loyalty would not his. Shoulder healed, but healed wrong, the way old wounds do. And by 1896, though the cold mornings had become something he could not work through anymore, he moved to town into a small house on a quiet street with a south-facing window that caught the afternoon sun. Elena rode in to see him every month. They would sit in his kitchen, a different kitchen, smaller, with a view of a neighbor's fence instead of open country, and drink coffee and talk about cattle prices and the weather and which of the new families moving into the valley seemed likely to stay. The conversation was the same as it had always been. The location was different, that was all. He died in the spring of 1900, in his bed, with Elena sitting beside him, and the afternoon sun coming through the south window the way it always did. She held his hand while his breathing changed and slowed and stopped. She sat with him for a while after. Then she stood, put on her hat, and rode back to the ranch. She stood at her kitchen table for a long time when she got home, her hands flat on the wood, not moving. The ranch was quiet around her. The spring was running outside. After a while, she went to the shelf and unlocked the wooden box. She took out the envelope, the letter without a name on it, and she opened it and read it through once more, and then added 3 more words at the very end, below the 2 sentences she had written after everything else. She sealed it again, put it back, locked the box. She did not write down what those 3 words were. Some things are not for telling. In the spring of 1902, Elena Varga sold the Varga Ranch. She had thought about it for 2 years before she acted, not with the hesitation of someone uncertain, but with the deliberateness of someone who needed to be sure they were doing it for the right reason at the right time. And not one day before. The buyers were a young couple named James and Catherine McAllister. They had 3 children, a boy of 10, a girl of 7 named Clara, and a baby, still in the process of deciding whether the world was worth the trouble of arriving in. They had come west from Ohio with more hope than money and more determination than either, which in Elena's estimation was the right set of materials for the work ahead of them. She met with them in the kitchen. She made coffee. She showed them the deed. She walked them through the water rights documentation, the property boundaries, the maintenance, the east fence needed every spring. Without fail, she answered every question they had, and when they ran out of questions, she sat back and looked at them both. "One condition," she said. James McAllister straightened slightly. "Ma'am? Not in the contract. A condition I'm asking you to honor because it's right, not because it's legal." He nodded carefully. "Never sell the water rights," she said. "Not for any price. Not to any company. Not in good years or bad years or years when the money would solve every problem you have, and then some." She held his gaze steadily. "The water rights stay with this land. That is the condition." James McAllister looked at his wife. Catherine McAllister looked back at him with the particular look of a woman who has already made up her mind and is waiting for her husband to arrive at the same place. He looked back at Elena. "You have my word," he said. Elena signed the papers. She did not look at the house when she walked to her horse. She did not look at the windmill, or the 3 wooden markers behind it, or the tree line along the creek. She had said what needed to be said and done what needed to be done, and there was nothing left to look at that she had not already committed to a place deeper than memory. She mounted up, slowly, because of the knee, using the fence rail the way she had for the past 3 years, and she rode toward the road. She did not look back, not because it did not hurt. It hurt in a way that had no clean bottom to it, a way she had no name for, and did not try to name. But she had learned a long time ago that looking back at things you have chosen to leave is a form of arguing with a decision that has already been made. She had made the decision. The land was in the right hands. The water would keep running. Net, that was enough. She rode toward town without looking back, and the ranch fell away behind her, and the dust from her horse hung in the still air over the road for a while, and then settled, the way dust always does. She lived 14 more years in Santa Fe, in a boarding house on a quiet street that cost more per month than the ranch had earned in a good year. She did not mind this. She had enough, which had always been all she asked for. She kept to herself, mostly. She walked in the mornings when the knee allowed it. She read in the afternoons. She wrote occasional letters to people she had known. though as the years passed the number of people she had known who were still alive grew smaller and the letters grew less frequent. She died on a Thursday morning in the spring of 1916 in the narrow bed in her room at the boarding house at 77 years old. The landlady found her when she did not come down for breakfast. She was lying on her back with her hands folded on the blanket, and the expression on her face was, the landlady did anyone who asked for years afterward. Not peaceful exactly. Something more specific than peaceful. The expression of someone who had done what they set out to do and knew it completely, without remainder. In her shirt pocket they found a small brass key. Nobody in the boarding house knew what it unlocked. 3 weeks after Elena died, a letter arrived at the Varga Ranch addressed to James McAllister. Inside the envelope, there was no money, no deed, no legal document of any kind. There was the small brass key and a single piece of paper with 2 words written on it in Elena's plain, careful handwriting, the box. James McAllister was in the barn when his wife called him. He came in wiping his hands on a rag and read the note twice and then stood in the kitchen looking at the brass key in his palm for a long time. Then he went to the shelf. The wooden box had been there since before they moved in. It had always been there, sitting in the same spot on the same shelf, and in 4 years none of them had thought to question it or touch it. It was simply part of the kitchen, the way the stone walls were part of the kitchen, and the east-facing windows were part of the kitchen, and the word carved above the door frame was part of the kitchen. He put the key in the lock. It turned. Inside the box there were 3 things. A folded letter on company stationery dated the summer of 1889, offering $15,000 for the Varga Ranch and all associated water rights. The paper was soft at the folds and yellowed at the edges and had been handled so many times it had taken on the texture of cloth. A handwritten document, dates, names, archive references, with 2 words underlined at the bottom in pencil. He read it carefully. By the time he finished, he understood what it was and what it had taken to find it and what it meant that it had been kept here all these years instead of thrown into a fire somewhere, and a sealed envelope with no name written on the outside. He sat down at the kitchen table. His wife sat across from him. Through the window, they could hear Clara and her brother in the yard, their voices rising and falling in whatever argument or game occupied them that afternoon. The baby, not a baby anymore, 4 years old, and loud about it, was asleep in the back room. James picked up the envelope. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened it carefully, the way you open something that has been waiting a long time, and unfolded the pages inside. The letter was 3 pages written in pencil on paper that had been folded and unfolded enough times to have gone almost translucent at the creases. The handwriting was plain and unhurried, and completely itself. No flourishes, no apologies, no unnecessary words. He read it. Catherine read it. After him, they sat with it for a long time. Without speaking outside, the children's voices rose and then settled. A horse shifted in the stable. The spring ran somewhere to the north, the same as it's always, cold and steady, from deep in the rock. The letter did not ask for anything. It did not make claims about sacrifice or legacy or what the land was worth in any accounting beyond the practical one. It told the story of the spring, where it came from, how it had held through the worst years, what it needed to keep running. It told the story plainly and specifically, the way Elena Varga had told all things. And at the bottom, below everything else, were 5 words, added in slightly heavier pencil. The last thing she had written in this letter, added years after everything above them, on a day James McAllister would never know about and could not have imagined. He read those 5 words. He sat with them. Then he folded the letter carefully along its worn lines and placed it back in the envelope and set the envelope back in the wooden box, beneath the offer letter and the handwritten document. He placed the brass key inside as well. He closed the lid. Catherine rose and took the box from the table and carried it to the shelf and set it back in exactly the place where it had always sat. Clara came in from the yard, her boots dusty, her hair loosened from its braid and flying in every direction, to my mother. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her parents sitting at the table with the particular alertness of a 7-year-old who understands that something has happened without being able to say what. "Mama," she said, "what is it?" Catherine held out her hand. Clara came and climbed into her lap, and Catherine held her there, one arm around the girl's waist, and looked out the window toward the north pasture, where the tree line showed dark green against the pale summer sky. "There was a woman," Catherine said, "who lived here before us." "What was her name?" "Elena Varga." Clara considered this. "What happened to her?" "She died," Catherine said. "A few weeks ago, in Santa Fe. Was she old?" "Very old." Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking the way children think, directly, without the detours adults put in the way. "Did she like it here?" she said. Catherine looked at James. James looked back at her. "Yes," Catherine said. "She liked it here very much. Why did she leave?" The afternoon light came through the east-facing windows the way it had always come, long and golden and unhurried, falling across the kitchen floor in the same pattern it had fallen in, since Jose Varga set those windows in the stone in the winter of 1863. "Because it was time," Catherine said, "and because she trusted us to take care of it." Clara looked at the shelf where the box sat. "What's in the box?" she said. "A letter," Catherine said, "and some other things." "What does the letter say?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. The spring ran outside. The horses moved in the stable. The baby stirred in the back room and settled again. "It says to never sell the water," Catherine said. Clara thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "We won't," she said, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "No," Catherine said, "we won't. The ranch is still there." The stone house that Jose Varga built with his own hands in the winters of 1863 and 1864, stone by stone in the high desert cold, is still standing. The walls are still thick. The windows still face east. The word carved above the doorframe is still there, worn by decades of weather, but legible to anyone who takes the trouble to look for it. Varga. The spring still runs. It runs the same way it has always run, cold and clear from deep in the rock, out across the stones, down through the north pasture to the creek below. It ran the day Jose Varga found it. It ran the day he died. It ran on the Thursday morning of the summer of 1889, while 20 men walked across the scrubland toward a stone house, and a woman stood at the front steps and made, for the last and final time, the only decision she had ever really been making. It is running now. It does not know about any of this. It does not need to. It has no memory of Elena Varga or Jose Varga or Marcus Webb or Samuel Cross or Hector Reyes or any of the rest of them. It has no memory at all. But we do. And that is the difference between water and people. Water just runs. People choose. Elena Varga chose every day for 31 years to stand where her father had stood and hold what he had held and carry forward the weight of everything that had been paid so that she could stand there at all. She did not do it because it was easy. She did not do it because she was unafraid. She did not do it because she was certain it would end the way it ended. She did it because some things are worth the cost, and some promises, once made, do not belong to the person who made them. Any more, they belong to the land, they belong to the water. They belong to the morning light, coming through east-facing windows, onto a kitchen floor where a woman sat alone in the small hours and wrote the truth down on paper that would outlast her, and locked it in a box, and put the key in her pocket, and went out to watch the sun come up over the hills one more time. The creek does not remember her name, but we do. And on certain evenings, when the light comes down at that long golden angle across the scrubland, and the air smells of sage, and the water moves over the stones in the particular way it moves, when the day has been hot and the evening is finally cooling, on those evenings, if you stand at the north fence and listen, you can hear something in the sound of it that is not quite silence and not quite speech,